My name is Mara Whitcomb. I am 34 years old, and 4 days before my company was supposed to close an $18.7 million Series B investment round, my parents' lawyer sent me a document asking for 22% of everything I had built. Not a birthday card. Not an apology. A document. It arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday morning, while rain tapped against the kitchen windows of my house in Seattle, and my laptop sat open beside a half-finished investor memo. I remember the envelope because it looked expensive. Thick cream paper. Black embossed lettering. Malcolm Pierce, attorney at law. Portland, Oregon. For 10 years, my parents had acted like I was dead. They missed my wedding. They never met the team that helped me build Harbor Light systems from 3 laptops, 1 borrowed server, and a rented office above a dentist. They did not call when our first hospital contract made the local business journal. They did not call when my name appeared in Forbes Northwest under a headline about women changing medical logistics. But somehow, they found my address when there were shares to claim. Inside the envelope was something called a family restitution and equity transfer agreement. According to my father, Russell, and my mother, Celeste, I owed the Whitcomb family compensation for the sacrifices they made raising me. Their lawyer had written it in polished language, but the meaning was simple. They wanted me to sign away 22% of my founder shares into a family recovery trust 96 hours before our closing deadline. I read the first page, standing at the kitchen island. I read the second page, sitting down. By the time I reached the signature line, I started laughing. Not because it was funny. Because Malcolm Pierce had missed one hidden clause in Harbor Light's operating agreement. And that clause meant my parents had just tried to steal something they could never legally touch. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking, let's begin the story. I did not call my parents. That was the first difference between the woman I had become and the girl they raised. 10 years ago, I would have picked up the phone with my chest already tightening, trying to sound calm, trying to ask what I had done wrong without making them angrier. I would have explained before anyone accused me. I would have apologized for needing time to think. I would have confused their emergency with my obligation, because that was how our family trained me. If Russell Whitcomb needed something, everyone else was supposed to become useful. But I was not that girl anymore. I laid the agreement flat on the kitchen island and took photos of the cover letter, the signature page, and the paragraph where Malcolm Pierce described my company as if it were something my parents had helped build. The language was polished, almost gentle. That made it worse. It was theft wearing a pressed suit. Then I opened the secure corporate folder on my laptop. Harbor Light's operating agreement was exactly where it should have been, dated, countersigned, backed up, and boring, in the way only truly important documents are boring. I scrolled until I found section 11.4. I read it once as a daughter. Then I read it again as a CEO. Only after that did I call our company counsel. She answered in the clipped, alert tone of someone who knew a call before 9 in the morning was never casual. I told her I had received a demand from my parents' attorney involving my founder shares. I sent the scans while standing barefoot on the cold tile, watching the upload bar crawl across the screen. Outside, rain blurred the backyard fence into gray lines. Upstairs, Rowan was on a client call, his voice low and steady through the ceiling, unaware that 10 years of silence had just walked into our kitchen wearing legal letterhead. A few minutes later, counsel called back. He either didn't read your governing documents, she said, or he hoped you wouldn't. There was no shock in her voice. That steadied me more than sympathy would have. Next, I called Graham Sloan, Harbor Light's lead investor. Graham listened without interrupting, while I explained the agreement, the timing, and the family trust my parents had invented, as if putting the word family in a title made it clean. When I finished, he asked only one question. Did they read section 11.4? I looked down at Malcolm Pierce's letter, at the neat paragraphs arranged like a trap. No, I said. I don't think they did. Graham let out a quiet breath. Then that, he said, is their first mistake. To understand why I did not sound surprised on those calls, you have to understand the house I came from. The Whitcomb house in Portland looked warm from the street. White siding, trimmed hedges, a red front door my mother repainted every spring because she believed appearances were a form of discipline. Inside, everything had a place. Shoes lined up in the mudroom, mail sorted by size, family photos arranged so guests could see the version of us Celeste wanted them to believe in. But there were always two sets of rules in that house. Preston was treated like the future. I was treated like someone who would always manage. When my brother wanted something, my parents called it an investment. When I needed something, they called it character building. Preston's mistakes were signs of ambition. Mine were proof that I thought too highly of myself. If he failed a class, he was under pressure. If I brought home a 94, Russell asked where the other 6 points went. The year Preston turned 16, my father bought him a used BMW because, according to him, a young man needed confidence. 2 years later, when I turned 16, he handed me a bus schedule and said learning independence would make me grateful. My mother smiled from the kitchen island, like that was wisdom instead of neglect. I believed them for longer than I like to admit. I believed being low maintenance made me good. I believed not asking for rides, not asking for money, not asking for comfort meant I was easier to love. So I became easy. I packed my own lunches. I bought my own winter coat from a clearance rack. I filled out scholarship forms at the public library because our home printer was, for business use, which somehow included Preston's business ideas, but not my college applications. When I told Russell I wanted to study computer science, he looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "If you're as smart as you think you are," he said, "you'll figure it out." So I did. I took night shifts in the basement logistics department of Street Ansell Medical Center, a place that smelled like disinfectant, cardboard, and burnt coffee. My job was not impressive. I scanned equipment tags, updated transport logs, carried supply bins, and listened to nurses argue over missing infusion pumps and delayed lab pickups. Every night, I watched smart people lose time, because the system around them was held together by clipboards, phone calls, and exhausted memory. That was where Harbor Light began, though I did not have a name for it yet. Not in a boardroom. Not with a pitch deck. In a hospital basement at 17 inches the morning, standing beside a broken label printer, I realized the problem was not that people did not care. The problem was that no one had built them a better way. The first person who understood what I had noticed was not a professor, not an investor, and not anyone in my family. It was Beatrice Vale. At the time, Beatrice was 72 and working part-time as a consultant for Street Anselm after retiring as the chief financial officer of a regional hospital network. She had silver hair she wore in a low knot, square glasses, and a way of looking at spreadsheets that made people stop exaggerating. Nobody called her warm. Nobody called her gentle. But when Beatrice listened, she listened, like the truth was a number buried in a column, and she intended to find it. I met her after a supply meeting that had gone badly. A shipment of portable monitors had been sent to the wrong building, 2 lab couriers were waiting on paperwork nobody could locate, and a nurse manager had nearly cried from exhaustion in the hallway. I was standing near the copy machine with a clipboard pressed against my chest, trying not to look as young and tired as I felt, when Beatrice turned to me and asked, "You saw where the failure was, didn't you?" I thought she was accusing me. I said, "The transfer log wasn't updated." She shook her head. "That's the symptom. What's the failure?" No one had ever asked me a question like that. In my parents' house, questions were traps. At work, questions were usually blame wearing a uniform. But Beatrice asked as if she expected me to have an answer. So I gave her one. I told her the hospital did not have a people problem. It had a visibility problem. Equipment, couriers, requests, delays, everything existed in separate little kingdoms. By the time one department realized another department was waiting, an hour was. Beatrice stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, Write that down before someone with more confidence steals it. That was the beginning. Over the next year, she became the closest thing I had to a mentor. She reviewed my rough sketches on legal pads. She corrected my budget assumptions in red ink. She introduced me to words I had never heard at my parents' dinner table: governance, vesting, dilution, assignability, fiduciary duty. When I built the first version of the software, I showed it to her in the hospital cafeteria between shifts. I expected her to comment on the design. Instead, she asked, "Who owns the code?" I blinked. "I wrote it." "That is not what I asked." A week later, she made me sit with an attorney and form the company properly. She insisted on clean ownership, clean records, and one clause that felt excessive at the time: no founder shares could be transferred through coercion, private settlement, or any agreement outside board approval. "Lock the back door," she told me, tapping the paper with one polished fingernail, "before you build the front porch." Years later, my parents would discover the front porch. They never imagined Beatrice had helped me lock the door. The door I eventually locked had been left open by one night in particular. It was the Saturday after Thanksgiving, 10 years before Malcolm Pierce's letter landed on my kitchen island. I was 24, still working at Street Anselm, still building early versions of Harborlight on borrowed hours, and still foolish enough to believe that if my parents invited me home for dinner, it might mean they missed me. The house smelled like roasted turkey, reheated in butter, and Celeste's cinnamon candles. She had set the dining room like guests were coming, though it was only the four of us. Russell sat at the head of the table. Preston sat to his right, tapping his thumb against his water glass, wearing a navy blazer too expensive for a man whose first clinic was already behind on rent. I noticed the tension before anyone said a word. My mother kept refolding her napkin. My father kept clearing his throat. Preston avoided looking at me completely. That was how I knew I was not there for dinner. I was there for a transaction. Russell waited until the plates were full before he began. He talked about Preston's clinic like it was a public service instead of a business bleeding money. He used words like expansion, timing, temporary pressure, and family support. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a business loan package. $180,000. My name had already been typed onto the personal guarantor line. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft scrape of Preston's fork against his plate. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the projected revenue attached behind them. Then I looked at my brother. 3 days earlier, Preston had accidentally copied an old family email thread, and my address was still buried in it. The real vendor balances were in that thread. The clinic was not temporarily tight. It was drowning. The client numbers in the folder were inflated. The rent was overdue. 2 equipment suppliers were threatening collections. Russell said, "You have clean credit, Mara. This helps everyone." Celeste reached for my hand. "Your brother just needs one person to believe in him." I pulled my hand back. "No," I said. The words sat in the room like broken glass. Preston finally looked up, offended more than frightened. Celeste's eyes filled immediately, but even then, I could tell the tears had been waiting backstage. Russell's face hardened in stages. Disappointment first, then anger, then that cold paternal authority he used when he wanted obedience to look like morality. "If you walk out tonight," he said, "don't ever use the Whitcomb name again." I waited for someone to soften, for my mother to say he did not mean it, for Preston to admit he had lied. No one did. So I stood up, took my coat from the back of the chair, and walked toward the front door. That night, I did not lose my family. I lost the illusion that I had one. For the first few months after that dinner, I still checked my phone more than I should have. Not because I expected Russell to apologize. My father did not believe in apologies. He believed in revisions. If enough time passed, he would simply tell a new version of the story, where his cruelty became firmness, his demands became concern, and my refusal became proof that I had always been difficult. But some small, humiliating part of me waited for Celeste. I thought my mother might call when the anger cooled. I thought she might leave a voicemail in that soft voice she used when guests were around, saying things had gotten out of hand, saying Thanksgiving had been emotional, saying maybe we should talk. I did not need much back then. One honest sentence might have kept me tied to them for years. It never came. December passed, then January. My birthday arrived in February with no card, no text, not even the automated family group message my mother used to send with balloon emojis and a Bible verse. By spring, I heard through a cousin that Celeste had told people I was taking space because success had made me cold. By summer, Russell was telling old clients that Rowan had filled my head with ideas about independence, even though Rowan and I were only dating then, and he had never once told me what to do. That was how they erased me. Not with one announcement, but with careful little edits. At first, the silence hurt like an injury. Then, slowly, it became weather. Something I noticed, something I dressed for, something I stopped expecting to change. I moved into a small studio in Tacoma, where the heater clicked all night and the window leaked during heavy rain. I worked at Street Anselm until 6, coded until my eyes burned, and slept with a notebook beside the mattress, because ideas came at inconvenient hours. Rowan started coming by after his shifts with takeout, replacement cables, and the kind of quiet company that did not ask me to perform gratitude. Beatrice kept pushing me harder than anyone. She did not soothe me when investors ignored my emails, or when the first demo crashed in front of a hospital administrator. She circled the problem in red ink and said, "Again." So I tried again. The first contract was small. 1 outpatient center, 12 transport staff, a 3-month pilot. But the software worked. Delays dropped. Missing equipment reports fell. Nurses started emailing screenshots with thank you notes attached. Then came a second facility, then a regional lab network, then a hospital system that asked if HarborLight could scale across 3 counties. 10 years went by that way. While my family told people I had forgotten where I came from, I was building something they had never bothered to see. The first time my family saw what I had built, they did not call me. They read about it. A business journal in Portland ran a profile after HarborLight signed a regional hospital contract in Washington and Oregon. The headline called me a Portland native, leading an $18.7 million medical logistics company. The article mentioned our upcoming Series B, our hospital clients, and the fact that I still owned a significant founder stake. It included a photo of me standing in our Seattle office beside a wall of route maps and live transport data. 3 days later, Malcolm Pierce's envelope arrived. At first, I thought the timing was ugly but simple. My parents had seen a number, decided it was partly theirs, and hired a lawyer to dress greed in legal language. But after my counsel read the agreement and Graham confirmed the investor side was protected, I did what Beatrice had trained me to do. I stopped reacting and started verifying. I opened public records the way another person might open an old family album. Business registrations, court filings, property liens, county mortgage records, state licensing documents. The truth was not hidden. It was just scattered, waiting for someone patient enough to line up the dates. Preston had not opened 1 successful wellness clinic. He had opened 5. 3 were already closed. 1 had been evicted from a retail plaza outside Beaverton. Another was being sued by an equipment vendor for unpaid lease payments on treatment tables and diagnostic machines. The last 2 were still technically operating, but only because Russell had been feeding them money like a man tossing furniture into a fire to keep warm. Then I found the filings on my parents' house. The Portland home with the red front door and Celeste's perfect hedges had been refinanced twice. A hard money lender had filed a lien 8 months earlier. Russell had used the property as collateral for a business rescue loan tied to Preston's clinics. Celeste had drained a retirement account I never knew she had. There was a notice pending that gave them 42 days before the foreclosure process moved from threat to public record. I sat very still when I saw that. Not because I felt sorry for them, because I finally understood the size of the lie. They had not returned because time had softened them. They had not missed birthdays, holidays, my wedding, and 10 years of ordinary life, only to suddenly remember their daughter. They were out of assets. That evening, an unknown number called me. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Mara?" a woman said. "It's Tessa, Preston's ex-wife." Her voice was tired, careful. "He's trying to use your shares as collateral," she said. "You need to know that before you walk into any room with them." I did not sleep much after Tessa's call. Not because I was afraid of Preston. Fear would have been simpler. What kept me awake was the precision of it, the way every piece of my parents' sudden interest had a dollar amount attached. The article had given them my valuation. Malcolm Pierce had given them legal paper. Preston had already found a private lender willing to treat my company like a life raft, even though no one had asked whether I intended to climb aboard. By 7 the next morning, I was at my desk with coffee going cold beside my keyboard. I did not call Russell. I did not call Celeste. I did not send Preston a warning text. People like my family heard warnings as invitations to argue. I had spent enough years being cross-examined at dinner tables. This time, I wanted documents, not explanations. I built the folder in order. First came Malcolm's demand letter and the proposed family restitution and equity transfer agreement. Then the current cap table, showing exactly what I owned and what I did not. Behind that went Harbor Light's operating agreement, with Section 11.4 marked by a pale yellow tab. I added the board consent requirements, investor rights agreement, and the transfer restriction schedule our counsel had insisted on during the last financing round. Then I added the family file, Preston's clinic closures, the vendor lawsuit, the Beaverton eviction notice, the lien on my parents' house, the refinance records, the pending foreclosure notice. Tessa forwarded screenshots before lunch. Messages from Preston to a lender describing my founder shares as family accessible equity once I signed. I printed those too, even though my hands went cold when I read them. By afternoon, the folder was thick enough that the brass fastener strained when I closed it. I called our company counsel first, then Graham, then Beatrice. Beatrice listened without interrupting. I could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass on her end of the line. "Do not educate them before the meeting," she said. "I wasn't planning to." "Good. Let them speak first. People like your father confess when they think they are winning." So I called Malcolm Pierce's office and asked for an in-person meeting in Seattle. I kept my voice polite. I said a matter involving family equity should not be handled by mail. I said Russell, Celeste, and Preston needed to attend, so no one could later claim they misunderstood the terms. The receptionist sounded relieved. That told me everything. They thought I was coming in to negotiate. I was coming in to document. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2, which gave me one night to sit with the part of myself that still remembered being 24 at that dining room table. I stayed late at Harbor Light, long after most of the office had emptied and the cleaning crew had begun moving softly through the halls. Seattle was dark outside the windows, the kind of wet, blurred dark that made every office tower look like it was floating. On the main dashboard, tiny colored routes pulsed across the map, hospital couriers moving through the city, lab pickups clearing, equipment transfers completing on time. Quiet proof that something I built was working while the family that once dismissed me tried to claim it. I walked past the conference rooms named after old lighthouses, past the customer support bullpen with abandoned coffee cups and hoodies over chairs, past the engineering corner where someone had left a half-eaten granola bar beside a keyboard. Then I stopped near the storage alcove behind the server room. The first Harbor Light server still sat there. It was too old to run anything important now. A dented black tower with a scratched side panel and a strip of masking tape where Rowan had once written, "Do not unplug unless you want Mara to haunt you." Years ago, that machine had lived under my desk in the Tacoma studio, humming so loudly I had to sleep with a pillow over my head. Rowan had rebuilt its fan twice. Beatrice had once rested her purse on it during a budget review and told me my company had better grow faster than my hardware. I put my hand on top of it. For a moment, I was not a CEO. I was that tired young woman eating cereal for dinner. refreshing unpaid invoices, trying to decide whether to buy groceries or renew a software license. I was the daughter still waiting for a mother who never called. I was the girl who thought being useful might eventually turn into being loved. That was the part of me my parents expected to meet in Malcolm Pierce's office. The part that could be pressured with the word family. But standing there in the dim hallway, with the server room cooling system humming behind me, I understood something cleanly. I did not need Russell to admit he was wrong. I did not need Celeste to confess that her tears had always arrived on schedule. I did not even need Preston to apologize for offering my life to another lender like collateral. I only needed to protect what 10 years of silence had forced me to build. Before I left, I passed Beatrice's old note, taped inside my office door. Lock the back door before you build the front porch. Tomorrow, my family was going to knock on the porch. They had no idea the door behind me was already sealed. Thursday arrived with a low gray sky, and the kind of rain that made downtown Seattle look polished and expensive. I dressed the way I did for board meetings, not family emergencies. Charcoal blazer, black trousers, low heels, my hair pulled back, no jewelry, except my wedding band. The folder sat on the passenger seat during the drive, thick and quiet, like another person in the car. Malcolm Pierce's office was on the 31st floor of a glass tower near the waterfront. Everything about the lobby had been designed to make people lower their voices. Marble floors, soft lighting, a receptionist who smiled without showing any warmth. When I gave my name, her eyes flicked down to the folder under my arm and then quickly back to my face. "They're waiting for you in conference room 3, she said. Of course they were. I followed her down a hallway lined with framed degrees and abstract paintings that looked like they had been chosen by committee. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I saw them before they saw me. Russell sat at the far end of the table, claiming the seat like he had paid rent on authority itself. His suit was navy, well cut, but his face looked thinner than I remembered. Celeste sat beside him in a cream dress and pearls, hands folded tightly over a leather handbag. She had dressed for forgiveness. Preston sat 2 chairs away, staring at his phone, one knee bouncing under the table. Malcolm Pierce stood when I entered. He was in his late 50s, silver hair, polished shoes, the practiced expression of a man who believed a calm voice could turn pressure into professionalism. "Mara," Celeste said, rising halfway from her chair. "Sweetheart." The word landed between us like something expired. I did not move toward her. I walked to the opposite side of the table, set my folder down, and sat. Celeste, Russell, Preston. Using their first names changed the temperature in the room. My mother's smile tightened. My father's jaw shifted once. Preston looked up just long enough to look offended, as if distance had been acceptable only when he chose it. Malcolm cleared his throat and placed a clean copy of the agreement in front of me. A silver pen rested beside it, angled toward my right hand. "This does not need to become adversarial," he said. "Everyone here wants a private resolution." Russell leaned forward. "You built something impressive, Mara. No one is denying that. But you built it with the discipline this family gave you." Celeste touched the corner of one eye. "No tears yet. Just preparation. We are asking for fairness," she said softly. "Not charity." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Malcolm. "Before we talk about fairness," I said, "did any of you read section 11.4? For half a second, nobody moved. That was the thing about a good question in a room built on pressure. It did not need volume. It only needed accuracy. Malcolm Pierce's expression stayed professional, but something small changed around his eyes. Russell looked irritated, as if I had interrupted a sermon. Celeste glanced from my face to the agreement, trying to decide whether section 11.4 sounded dangerous or merely inconvenient. Preston stopped bouncing his knee. Malcolm recovered first. "I'm not sure that section is relevant to the matter before us." "That's interesting," I said, opening my folder, "because it is the only section that matters." I took out a copy of Harbor Light's operating agreement and slid it across the table. Not toward my parents, toward Malcolm. He was the lawyer. Let him be the first one to understand the mistake. The room went quiet as he adjusted his glasses and began reading. I watched his face, not the paper. His confidence did not disappear all at once. It drained slowly, line by line, like water leaving a cracked basin. Section 11.4 was not long. Beatrice had insisted that protection should be plain enough for a hostile person to understand and strong enough for a careless one to regret. It stated that founder shares could not be transferred through coercion, private settlement, family claim, outside agreement, or any unapproved arrangement without written board consent. Any attempted transfer would be void. Worse for my parents, it would trigger Harborlight's right to repurchase the disputed shares for $1. $1. Not 22%. Not a family recovery trust. Not a rescue package for Preston. $1. Malcolm read the paragraph again. This time, he did not pretend. Russell leaned forward. What is this? It's the governing document for the company you tried to take equity from, I said. Celeste's voice sharpened beneath the softness. Mara, don't be dramatic. No one is taking anything. We are talking about what you owe your family. I turned to her then. No, I said. You are talking about what you can still extract from me. Preston pushed back from the table. This is insane. She's twisting it. Before he could continue, I removed the printed screenshots Tessa had sent and placed them beside the agreement. Malcolm's eyes moved to the lender messages. I saw the moment he recognized Preston's wording. Family accessible equity. Pending transfer. Collateral. Then Graham Sloan joined the meeting by speakerphone, exactly as arranged. If Mara signs your agreement, Graham said, calm and precise, your trust receives nothing. The attempted transfer fails. The repurchase right activates, and Harborlight's board treats this as an unauthorized claim against founder equity. Malcolm closed the folder in front of him very slowly. Russell's face had gone pale. Celeste stopped touching her eyes. And for the first time in 10 years, my family had nothing useful to say. Malcolm was the first one to move. He stood slowly, took the agreement he had drafted, and pulled it back toward his side of the table as if distance could undo what had already been said. His voice was lower when he spoke again, stripped of the smooth confidence he had used when I walked in. I need to review this matter further before advising anyone to proceed. Russell turned on him. Review what? You said this was straightforward. Malcolm did not look at my father. That told me enough. Men like Russell were used to lawyers sounding like weapons. He had never considered what happened when the weapon realized it had been pointed in the wrong direction. I was not provided with complete governing documents, Malcolm said. Preston muttered something under his breath. Celeste's hand tightened around her handbag strap until the leather creaked. The room that had been arranged to make me feel small now felt too bright, too quiet, too honest. I gathered my copies, but I left one packet on the table for Malcolm, the screenshots from Tessa, the lien filings, and the foreclosure notice. Not as revenge, as record. You may want to compare what they told you, I said, with what they were planning to do. Russell pushed back his chair. You think you're better than us now? 10 years ago, that question would have hooked into me. I would have rushed to soften it, deny it, prove humility, prove loyalty, prove I was still reachable. But sitting in that glass room, across from the people who had found me only when my life became useful, I felt no need to argue. No, I said, I think I'm finally unavailable. That was all. I left before anyone could turn the silence into another performance. By the end of the week, Malcolm Pierce formally withdrew from representing my parents in any matter involving Harborlight. Graham notified Investor Counsel. Our board documented the attempted unauthorized claim against founder equity. The Series B closed on schedule. Preston's private lender disappeared the moment the shares became useless to him. Tessa sent one final message saying, I'm sorry they tried. I believed her. As for Russell and Celeste, I heard pieces through other people. The foreclosure threat became public. The story they had told for 10 years began to crack under the weight of one simple question. If I was such a terrible daughter, Why had they needed my signature so badly? I did not celebrate. That night, Rowan and I ate takeout at our kitchen counter while rain moved softly against the windows. No champagne, no speech, just warm food, tired shoulders, and a quiet house no one could use as leverage. After 10 years, my parents finally came back into my life. Not because they loved me, because they found out I was worth something. What they missed was the one clause that proved I had already learned the lesson they taught me: never leave the thing you built unprotected. The lesson I took from all of this is not that family can hurt you. Most of us learn that sooner or later. The deeper lesson is that love, without respect, becomes a debt collector. It starts using old sacrifices as invoices. It reminds you who changed your diapers, who fed you, who gave you a roof, as if basic care was a loan waiting to be repaid with your future. Real family does not come back, only when your name is attached to money. Real love does not need a lawyer to explain its value. And real loyalty should never require you to destroy what you built just to prove you still belong. For years, I thought healing meant my parents would finally understand me. I thought peace would arrive the day they admitted they were wrong. But sometimes healing is quieter than that. Sometimes it is closing the door without slamming it. Sometimes it is answering manipulation with paperwork, not anger. Sometimes it is realizing you can miss the family you wanted without letting the family you had keep hurting you. Resilience is not becoming hard. It is becoming clear. Clear about your worth. Clear about your boundaries. Clear about the difference between helping someone and being harvested by them. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to protect something you built from people who felt entitled to it? Leave a comment, share where you are watching from, and tell me what part of Mara's story stayed with you the most. And if this story meant something to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need to hear that walking away is not always abandonment. Sometimes, it is survival.